Okay, here we go with our next installment of Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. I think we're on edition number 5 of our series, and we're heading into chapter 12. And I have a question to ask you before we get started, but you remember that Ma and Ba had followed Min Lee, and they thought they were following her footsteps, but they found out that it was merely the goldfish man. And I'm wondering, what do you think? What can you predict that the goldfish man will say? Is he going to be a wise person? Is he going to be a foolish guy? What information do you suppose he's going to give to them? So let's get started. Chapter 12. The goldfish man turned around and smiled questioningly at Ma and Ba, who could do nothing but continue to stare. He was slender and small, which is perhaps why it was so easy to mistake his footprints for Min Lee's. The dragging line Ma had thought were from Min Lee's walking stick led to his cart, and the bowls of goldfish caught the sifting beams from the sun, slivering it into flashing sparkles of light. The goldfish man's eyes also flashed as he looked at Ma and Ba and their dust-covered clothes and their haggard, tired faces. "Can I help you?" he asked them. "Well, we have been looking for our daughter," Ba stammered. "We are from the village of Fruitless Mountain." "You sold her a goldfish, and then," Ma sputtered, "and then she ran away to change our fortune." "I see," the goldfish man said, and again he looked at them, at Ma's tight, angry frown and Ba's careworn, worried face. "And you are going after her to stop her?" "Of course," Ba said. "We need to bring her home." "Yes," Ma said. "She is acting crazy. Who knows what could happen to her?" "Well, she could succeed," the goldfish man said steadily. "She could find a way to change her fortune." "Well, she's trying to find Never-Ending Mountain," Ma said. "Ask the questions to the old man of the moon." "There is no way for her to succeed." "Yes," Ba said. "It's impossible." The goldfish man looked a third time at Ma and Ba, and this time they felt it. Under his gaze, Ma and Ba suddenly felt like freshly peeled oranges, and their words fell away from them inexplicably. They felt ashamed. "Let me tell you a story," the goldfish man said. And this is the story of the goldfish man. You know how they pop up like this. "My grandmother, Lelo, was a famous fortune teller." I know I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but bear with me. "People from faraway villages would line up at our home asking for lucky dates for weddings and predictions for their children. If she was ever wrong, we never heard of it. But a week before my 19th birthday, we heard her moaning in her room. When we rushed to her, we found her sitting on the floor with her fortune-telling sticks spread around her. To my surprise, as soon as I entered the room, her piercing eyes fixed upon me. 'You,' she said, 'you will die next week, on your birthday.'" Ooh. It was as if she had exploded a firecracker in the room. My parents and aunt and cousins burst into exclamations and wails. "It is true," my grandmother insisted. "I have checked and rechecked over and over again. And the sticks always say the same. Next week on his 19th birthday, he will die. This is his fortune." I could not believe it. How could this be true? But my belief in my grandmother was unshakable. If she said so, it must be true. I stood staring at my family, as my family created a storm around me. Finally, I said with a mouth as dry as sand, "Lao, isn't there anything I can do?" "There is only one thing you can do," she said, "but it is doubtful it will work." "Oh, I'll do it," I said. "First," Lolo said, "you must get a bottle of the finest wine and make a box of sweets." So Lalo went to the rich magistrate of the town and persuaded him to give her a bottle of his best wine. My mother and aunts hurried to the kitchen and prepared cakes, cookies, and sweetmeats, with much more care than ever before. Before the aromas of the delicacies were captured in our most ornate box, they floated in the air, causing all the neighborhood animals to whine at the door. And then Leolo went to her room and began to read her fortune sticks. When she came out, she gave me the box of sweets and the bottle of wine and sat me down. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You must do exactly as I say. Tomorrow morning, you must walk north of the village. Do not stop until the moon begins to appear in the sky, and when it does, you will see a mountain before you. And at the foot of the mountain, you will see an old man reading a book. Open the box of sweets and the bottle of wine and set them by him, but do not say a word unless he speaks to you first. This is the only chance we have to change your fortune." So the next morning, I followed her instructions, and it was as she'd said. I walked all day, and when the sun finally withdrew from the sky, there was a vast mountain in front of me whose tip seemed to touch the moon. Sitting cross-legged at the bottom was an old man, reading a giant book. The light from the moon seemed to make him glow silver. I opened the bottle of wine and the box of sweets and quietly laid them next to him. And then I sat and waited. The old man didn't notice me and continued to read. My mouth watered at the smell of the sweets as they drifted in the air, but I didn't move. And even though the old man was engrossed in his book, he must have smelled them as well, because without lifting his eyes from the page, he began to eat. It was only when the bottle of wine was empty and he was eating the last cake when the old man lifted his head. He seemed surprised to see the half-eaten cake in his hand. "I've been eating someone's food," he said to himself, and he looked up and he saw me sitting nearby. "You, boy, was this your food?" Yes," I said, and I came closer as he beckoned. "Well," he said to me, "what are you doing here?" And I told the old man my story while he rubbed his beard. And when he finished, he said nothing, but he began to turn the pages of his book, and finally he nodded. "Yes, it's true," the old man said. "You are to live only 19 years. And he turned the book toward me, and in the moonlight I read my name on the page, and next to my name was the number 19. "Please," I couldn't help asking, "isn't there a way to change it?" "Change it? Change the book of fortune?" "Yes," I nodded. "Well," the old man said, stroking his beard, "I am indebted to you for having eaten your food." He took a paintbrush from his robe and studied the page. He said to himself, perhaps, yes, this is how it can be done. And with a simple flick of his brush, he changed the 19 to a 79. "Good," he said to me. "You now have many more years of life. Live them well." Then he closed his book, stood up, and began to walk up the mountain, leaving me staring behind him. I sat there until he disappeared, and then turned around and went home. The next week, on my birthday, there was a terrible typhoon. The wind howled as it had never had before, and a tree fell right on top of the roof of our house and crashed into my room, narrowly missing me. If it had fallen just a bit more to one side, I would have been easily killed. But as I climbed out of the ruins of my room, I saw my grandmother's eyes staring into mine. Silently, she nodded. She did not need words to tell me what had happened. I knew my fortune had changed. And that's the end of that story. But for Min Lee to try to do that is different, Ba started. She is trying to find Never-Ending Mountain, ask a question. She is just a small girl. "Perhaps," the goldfish man said, "you need to trust her." "But," Ma said, "but she wants to do the impossible." "Impossible?" the goldfish man said. "Don't you see? Even fates written in the book of fortune can be changed. How can it be impossible?" How can anything be impossible? Ma and Ba could find no words. His eyes and the 100 eyes of goldfish behind him seemed to silently scold them. As they looked at the ground, the goldfish man shifted back his bag and turned toward his cart. Here, a gift, the gold man said, placing a bowl in Ba's shaking hands. The fish, the pale silver color of the moon, circled the bowl. Perhaps if you cannot trust your daughter, or trust that your daughter will find Never-Ending Mountain, you should trust that she will return home to you, because that is not impossible. So whether Min Li brings it to you or not, I wish you good fortune. And with a bow, the goldfish man walked away. His bowls of goldfish cast pieces of rainbows in the air, making him sparkle in the sun. Ma and Ba stood and watched him until he looked like a twinkling star in the distance. Here's chapter 13. After cutting the dragon free, Min Li's knife was dull and the skin from her fingers and toes was wrinkled from having been in the dragon's lake of tears for so long, and she was also very thirsty. The dragon offered to carry her to the freshwater stream. He knew the forest very well. We'll get you there faster, he said. Min Li was a little doubtful about riding on the dragon. It was one thing to climb on top of him while he was half covered in water, but now on dry land that she realized how large he really was. The dragon was as long as the street in front of Min Li's house. If he stretched himself on his arms and legs, he was as tall as a bird's nest in the tree, she realized. Even now, bending down for her, he was higher than her house. But he bent his elbow for her to like a step, and with 2 hands she boosted herself up and then climbed onto his back. The round ball on the dragon's head was the size of a small melon, just big enough for her to wrap 2 hands around, and she clutched it as the dragon began to move. It was faster, but not much. The dragon was nimble, but his large body had to constantly maneuver around trees and rocks, so it was awkward going. The constant jerking made Min Li feel like she was riding a huge water buffalo. As the dragon ducked underneath the branches and swerved through trees, Min Li understood why most dragons flew. Dragon, Min Li asked suddenly, how old are you? Old? The dragon said, and again it seemed like a question that he'd never been asked. I do not know. Well, Min Li said, how long have you been in the forest? The dragon thought hard. A long time, he said. I remember that when a bird flew from the sky and dropped a peach pit on the ground, and I watched that pit grow into a tree, and the peaches fell from the tree, and then more trees grew from the pits of those peaches until they became the grove of peach trees that the monkeys have now taken over. Well, that's very old, Min Li thought to herself, imagining the growth of trees. Dragon must have been in this forest for 100 years. And she felt a pang of pity as she imagined the dragon alone, unable to fly, endlessly struggling between trees and branches. After picking up her things and drinking at the freshwater stream, Min Li climbed back onto the dragon's back. She soon fell asleep, her head on the dragon's ball and her hand holding her rice bowl. Noticing she was asleep, the dragon moved slowly and quietly, even when the water from Min Li's compass splashed and trickled down his nose. It was only when a loud shrieking filled the forest that Min Li woke. It was such a wild and harsh noise that she bolted up, her eyes wide open in fear. Do not worry, the dragon told her. It is just the monkeys. And it was the monkeys. Even though the sun was dimming, Min Li could see the monkeys clamoring in the trees. Even though Min Li could not count that many of them, their screaming made it sound as if there were thousands. We are getting close to the peach trees, the dragon told Min Li, and they are getting angry. Stop here, Min-Li said, and she climbed off the dragon's back. And she could still see the monkeys through the leaves and branches, their bared teeth flashing. Those peach trees are exactly the direction we want to go, Min-Li said. We have to get past the monkeys. I could still force my way through, but the monkeys would attack you, the dragon said, and I am not sure if we could get you through unharmed. Listen to them. And the monkeys continued to scream. Min-Li covered her ears with her hands, but she could still hear them. It seemed like they were all screeching, "Get away from here! Get away from here! Ours! Ours! All ours!" You're right, Min-Li told the dragon. They are not going to let us through. But you said that is the way to the old man of the moon, the dragon said, correct? Min-Li nodded. The monkeys' shrieks were starting to sound like hysterical laughter, getting louder and louder, like a volcano about to erupt. She looked from side to side, but the monkeys seemed to be everywhere. There was no way around them. Then the dragon asked, "What are we going to do?" Maybe you have some solutions for them? I don't know. It's always good to predict, isn't it? And so until next time, make sure you make some predictions about what you think. First of all, what do you think the goldfish man has encouraged Min-Li's mother and father to do? And what do you think the two of the characters, Min-Li and Dragon, are going to do about those darn monkeys? Okay, we'll see you later.